right, we're back, you patiently miserable accursed. David Herle here after a 2-week, much-needed end of August break. Thank you to all of you people who suggested that my mood on the more recent shows called for me to take a break. Friends, always looking out for me. I appreciate it. With the political panel, judging by your YouTube comments, you've had a difficult, even distressing time living without these people. Scott Reid, Jordan Leichnitz, and Kory Teneycke. Cripes, guys, I really missed you. I had a good break, but I've missed you. Who wants to talk about how much you missed me? Did you miss me, Jordan?
Of course,
Jordan,
we
you
miss
go
you.
first.
We definitely miss you. I think the time away though might have been good. I see more smiles. I see, so hopefully we'll have something else to offer other than doom and gloom.
I'm not sure, but yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I don't know that we can completely change the subject matter. Scott, how you been?
I've been okay. I think it's a measure of how somber you and I were in those last couple of pods that people did not ask me if we had taken a break. People asked me, is the pod over? Are you all right? Has David been institutionalized or possibly hospitalized? Like, I'm not kidding. Like, people were like, so is the pod finished? Like, I mean, did you guys just say, fuck, man, I left the ball on the 50-yard line and I walked off the field, right? Like, there was a lot of questioning about our mental health and our willingness to plow forward.
Kory, you're dressed for the first day back to school. Like, you were looking forward to this.
Yeah, I have been
Goldman
looking forward
Sachs
to it.
is where you go to school.
Yeah, I've been looking forward to it.
Do not be fooled by the orange tie, friends.
Right. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. I was joking earlier. It's not that NDP orange. It's Hermes. So,
Jesus Christ. You're so fucking nouveau riche.
Well, he couldn't be old money.
Just
He
leaning
couldn't
right
be old
in.
money. I mean, he would have rather been old money, but he couldn't be old money.
you gotta embrace your fate. You gotta embrace your fate.
All right, here's the show today. We're talking Poilievre 2.0. He's back, and maybe even more Poilievre, if that's possible. Our cursed clipping comes from Chris Varco, writing in the Calgary Herald. Prime Minister Carney taps Don Farrell to head up his major projects office out of Calgary, and we'll talk about everything embedded in that move. And then we'll do our annual look ahead on the fall session of Parliament. Anyone remember riding the flyer coaster at the CNE? Well, it's going to be a bit like that, but bumpier and potentially more dangerous. Finally, the incorporeal Mr. Pinsent joins us for our Hey Yous. So, all right, team. So, we while we were away, a number of things happened. But one of the things is Poilievre is decidedly back, and according to his wife Anna, they have Kory got a list. They've taken names, and they in their comeback trail. They would be sideswiping everybody who did them dirty. Along the way. Anyway,
well, if anyone thinks of any of those people, let me know.
The Pyrenees strike back. Yes, it's.
Oh my God!
Will it all be in her book?
Yeah. Well, Scott Reid. Reid, let's start with you.
Okay.
Let's start with you. Yeah, let's start with you.
On Poilievre.
On Poilievre. On messaging.
Well, I mean,
could they have made a clearer decision, but to relitigate the last election campaign?
I don't know if it's about relitigating. I think they just insist that they're right. This is a two-step process, yada, yada, yada. All the stuff they said on election night that you wondered if it would be fleeting, they have said, no, actually, that's canon. That is now, that's MCU canon. He is Dr. Doom. He is not Iron Man, and he's sticking with the role. And I think a lot of focus on crime, a lot of focus on immigration. So when you look at the issues where he has chosen to weigh in, he obviously continues, I think, in a way that should be distressing to the government, to appear to be in control of the cost of living, kitchen table economics issues. I think one of the interesting dynamics over the fall is, can Carney, who dominates Poilievre on the leadership matrix, on so many of those indices when it comes to pure leadership, can he use the budget, use the fall to wrestle away some of those street level economic issues, because right now it's like he owns the macroeconomic issues, but we're going into a tougher economic season. GDP down last week. I mean, this feels to me like the canary isn't in the coal mine. The canary is dead on the floor. But here's the thing I would say about Poilievre. I think it is such a weird time for him, because when I look at the guy, I can make an equally compelling case for him flourishing or him floundering. Like, he is like Schrodinger's cat. He is in a position of quantum superposition. He's Schrodinger's Khan. He could, in my view, you look at him and you could see how he could take advantage of a weaker economic situation, portray the government as out of touch, disconnected from people's daily lives. Say, listen, if you want someone that wants to go and, like, talk about Zelensky with Macron, then Mark Carney's your guy. If you want someone fighting on a daily basis to make sure that the $100 bill you face on a daily basis is reduced to 95 and 90, that's going to be me. You could see that. Or you could see a guy who's going to get absolutely encased in his own conservative corner strategy, where he reduces himself to a small handful of issues that have proven incapable of gathering a voter coalition that can compete successfully for a plurality, much less a majority. And so I just don't, I think it's going to be really fascinating to watch, because I think to a certain degree, mucky mucks like us underestimate Poilievre. And I really do think, I do think that.
I'm a fucking mucky muck now.
You're a mucky muck. You're a fucky fuck. You're a mucky fuck. Jesus. And, you sit there in your palatial summer home and, downtown Superior to Wakefield, and you just, you pronounce on this guy but I'm telling you, I think I'm a little worried as a liberal. Okay, back to my room full of worries. I look at the guy and I say, he's got a lane. I don't know if it's wide enough, and it does not appear as though he's interested in winding it. But I don't want to dismiss him. And I could just see, like, the Liberals feel to me like they are in a zone where they're like, the Trudeau Liberals were smug and virtuous. I'm worried that the Carney Liberals could get superior. In the sense that they are like, well, if it's a way in which we're pursuing something, then obviously it's right. And I think you got to be worried. So we'll see. Right now, Schrodinger's Khan. That's who Poilievre is.
Brand taglines are typically found at the end of a message. That's why they're called taglines, eh? As I mentioned last week, our presenting sponsor TELUS has a new one. We're always building Canada. I'm starting with it here because it's deeper than words for TELUS. It's a brand promise that goes to their values, like this recent announcement. The federal and BC governments have just committed over $77 million in combined funding to connect more than 6,900 rural and Indigenous households to fiber internet, plus a further $7 million for mobile service to another 727 households over 120 kilometers of rural roads. TELUS is partnering with funds of their own, building best-in-class infrastructure for it all. It's a project that lines up with Canada's promise of universal broadband access by 2030. So, tip of the cap to both the feds and BC government. But I just want to underline something here. The recent decision by the federal government to uphold the CRTC decision requiring large carriers to wholesale their fiber networks to other competitors. That decision has some of the other providers grumbling. But TELUS knows building a network is about what high-speed connectivity means to real people, the specific opportunities it unlocks. Indigenous communities can maintain culture, connection, and participate fully in the digital economy. It spurs economic growth and investment in rural communities. Environmental sustainability, because modern fiber networks are more energy efficient. The bridging of the digital divide and greater access to vital services like remote education and telehealth. And finally, nation building. Government policy and corporate responsibility coming together to build a stronger, more connected, more economically resilient Canada. Or, as TELUS puts it, we're always building Canada. You don't think I'd forget the tagline, did you? Jordan, Scott, just picking up some of what Scott said we can just forget about, but some of what
Yes,
Scott
I
said I
think
want
that's
to pick
right.
up on here, and that is the two lanes, and there was an issue in the election campaign. Are you going at affordability? Are you going at domestic issues? Or are you going at the leadership question? And he's lost the leadership question in the election. And he's still losing it according to pollsters today. But the polls also show that the domestic issues are as powerful, if not more powerful, than the sort of the leadership macro thing out there. So it's not a ridiculous long-term play to say, I'm going to continue to be the person that cares about those things. And when people inevitably turn around to, but you have to have a lot of discipline to do that. Because boy, when he was out there talking about axe the tax last week, everybody was like, oh man, really?
Yes, I think it's interesting because, and this is something that we've talked about before, the household level economic issues, so cost of living, and even things like the issue of crime. Like these have been really blind spots for the Carney government, sort of not just through the campaign, but into their period of governing so far. So for sure, it's a fruitful place for Poilievre to spend his time. But he has tension, right? He has a couple of audiences. So there's the general public audience, but they're really secondary for the next few months. He's got to get through his leadership review first in January, which means that I think a lot of what we're going to see over the next few months is really intended for an audience of his base and risks kind of pulling him off some of those issues that are a little bit more fruitful. And I mean, we saw this a little, like we were chatting about this a little bit over the last couple of weeks. You saw Poilievre going in on gender issues. You saw him, you can see him touching on some of those things that are far more niche, far more alienating to mainstream voters, but way more exciting for his base. And I think the reason for that is very clear. But the question is, what does he understand that dynamic to be? And is that something that we're going to see him change after January, or are we going to see more of the same? And I mean, I would argue at this point, I think we're going to see more of the same because what we're witnessing right now is not a doubling down on the
Can I
thesis of
ask
the
you, are you of
campaign.
the view
It's
that
like a
his leadership's
quadrupling
in
down.
Are you of the view that his leadership's in any doubt?
Yeah, why would he?
And
Why would he be adjusting his behavior in any way, shape, or form for that leadership review? What possible threat does he feel?
I don't think his leadership is necessarily in significant doubt, but I think he wants to come out with a strong number. And so I think that you can't imagine going through this period without an eye to that. But I also think he believes this stuff. I think he
Yeah,
believes that this is the right thesis, that this was success. And again, this goes back to, we talked a little bit about Jenny Byrne expressed this when she was on the Beyond the Ballot podcast the other week. Like they view this election as successful for them, notwithstanding the result. So they are not changing the formula. But the question I think for me remains, like we've seen in the past that he can be disciplined around cost of living issues, as he was under the Trudeau government. Now, again, there was discipline there that came with the idea that he was massively leading in the polls. He does not have that right now. He has tanked on the leadership question. So, can he hold it together through this period leading into the leadership race to stay focused on leadership issues, to stay focused on economic issues rather than being drawn into some of the kooky side stuff for his base? I don't know. Can he solve his problems with women? And I think it's really interesting to see
well, that's a universal question.
how they are talking and the amount that they are talking about crime now. I think they view this as their path back to female voters. But whether it's
And
enough
older. And older.
older, yeah,
Yeah.
and whether that's enough to overcome the ick factor and the suspicion that we saw where women peeled out of that vote coalition pretty early on remains to be seen. And then, of course, like we're not heading to an election tomorrow. So he can afford to play a long game to a certain degree. But a lot of how the math on this shakes out in the end also depends on what happens to the NDP. So that's another X factor in all of this. So I think that his tone, continues, for me as a pundit, like to suck. Right? It's very negative. It's very overstated. We've heard him out there saying over the last few, Carney's worse than Trudeau. So who is the audience for this? Right? And I think that for him, the danger is in really doubling down on that stuff, being relentlessly negative without any sort of remote positive trajectory of about what a solution might be. And you can see they're trying, they're tipping to that, we want to work with Carney, but it's like his heart is not really in it, right? So how does he square that circle? Is he going to continue? Is he going to really talk to that base of people leading into January and then shift? Or is he going to be able to solve some of those bigger problems in his vote coalition as he moves ahead? I'm not sure.
All right, Kory, it's baseball season, so bat clean up for us on this, would you? What do you think of Poilievre's re-entry into the orbit, and what do you think he should be talking about?
Well, I agree with bits and pieces of what Scott and Jordan have said.
Well, who couldn't? Bits and pieces.
Bits and pieces. Yeah, pretty big, pretty large pretty large bits and pretty sizable pieces. But here's the conundrum. He is not competitive on certain things right now, and I doubt he's going to be in the future, right? So on the leadership question, can he do better than he's doing today? Yeah, probably. Can you close what is a 30-point gap in most of the country? Unlikely, right? Like that's a heavy fucking lift. It's unlikely he's going to do that on his own anyway. And so broadening out the team, I guess we'll see whether that happens or not. We haven't really seen much of it to date. You can point to little bits and pieces of little signs of them allowing MPs to be out a little bit more and to travel a little more. And I think those are all, baby steps in the right direction. But, we'll see when the House comes back and he's back in the House of Commons, whether he is 2/3 of question period every day for the opposition or not, for instance. So I think there's more that remains to be seen with respect to that. But let's just take it as a given that if it's just on the leadership question, that's not going to be enough. You got to contest that a little bit, but it's, that in and of itself is not a winning strategy. I don't think affordability or concerns about the economy or concerns about crime or concerns about immigration are going anywhere. And so continuing to speak about those things, I think is just common sense. Now, is that enough? I'm not sure. Is that if spoken about in a way that is, by him and rhyming and sloganing and assholing his way through question period every day, is that going to get him where he needs to go? I don't think so. I think you got to find a different approach and some different tactics in terms of bringing those things forward. But I think at a high end strategic level, I think it makes some sense. Like if you're not going to win on the macroeconomic management, then maybe it's a good time to be talking about crime when, that's driving headlines and where the government is seen as completely inadequate in its response on that. So,
flippant, maybe even
flippant. Yeah. Flippant and uninterested. It's like, well, you would want to talk about that, wouldn't you? Well, yeah. Look, I'll get to some of this in my hey you, but it's a real fucking issue, and it cost them a bunch of seats, the Liberals, a bunch of seats in the last election, and it will cost them a bunch more seats in the next election if they don't get serious about it. And I don't see any signs that they're going to get serious about it anytime soon. I guess we will see. We will see. I think another part of what their strategy is predicated on, and here's where I'll take greater issue with it. It's predicated on the resurgence of the NDP. And I don't see any signs of that. I still don't see anyone with any name recognition putting their name forward to run for the leadership. I don't see much of a race taking shape there. I don't see any signs of life in the polling. And I don't see.
Well, actually, the Ontario provincial polling would
indicate it's getting worse.
Yeah,
it's getting worse, right? But where they need an NDP resurgence, I'm not seeing any signs of it. That said, you can't control, if you're Pierre Poilievre, what the NDP does, but you can control what you do. And I think some of the tone and his own personal comportment and communication of some of these issues is highly alienating to progressive voters. It's not like they're going to come and vote for him. But it's back to the same thing we've talked about many times before in this podcast. He's got to stop scaring the shit out of NDP, former NDP voters to the point where they vote for a central banker who they would never vote for in any other way, in any other election. So, they can do things to help the resurgence of the NDP, and they can do things to harm the resurgence of the NDP. And there's a lot of that that's actually within the Conservatives' control. And I don't see a lot of signs of them taking to heart those messages. I think the applause at the rallies still drives decision making to a degree that is very unhealthy and not in their own political interest.
So, as advertisers start annoyingly reminding us every year around midsummer, it's back to school time. Our sponsor, CN, has no intention of urging you to race out and spend money on 3-ring binders and pencils and crayons and new iPhones and integrated social media sunglasses or whatever else it is kids need to return to class nowadays. CN's job, as I've noted here before, is, to make the trains run on time and keep the economy moving. But to do that, it does need to send its railroaders back to school from time to time. CN operates 2 big campuses, one in Winnipeg, the other in Homewood, Illinois. All CN railroaders must graduate from one of them. The schools feature, among other things, locomotive and rail car simulators, like airplane simulators, but for trains, and stations to jack up cars and change wheels, and Potemkin bridges to train people for protection against falling, and signals and switching and communications training, and track welding training, and instructions on the technology CN deploys across its network to inspect tracks and wheels in real time for cracks, flaws, or overheating that can detect and prevent catastrophic events involving trains or the communities along its vast network, and a slew of other disciplines. CN's training campuses are, in a sense, the most valuable investment the railway makes. They graduate a workforce of railroaders utterly devoted to safety first, and to the smooth, timely movement of cargo, no matter the weather or conditions. And believe me, the weather and conditions can get pretty severe. Now, go ahead and enjoy the change of seasons. The economy you take for granted will keep working. CN will see to it. Who is they now? Is it just him and Anna? Like, who's a guiding mind in that place?
Well, I guess we'll find out, because, if you're to listen to some of the media and Jenny's podcast appearance, etc., she's still playing a significant role in the decision making there. But if you talk to other people, within Poilievre's office and elsewhere, they say she's nowhere to be found. So it's unclear who the advisor team is completely at this point, and I guess we'll see what happens. Whether Jenny's departure is a Putin Medvedev sort of deal, or whether it's a more permanent change. I don't know. But in the past, like say, pre-election, the size of the advisory team was minuscule. You could fit them in a Chevette, to throw back to cars nobody knows about anymore. But a small hatchback. It's not really being in a big group of folks, and I don't have anything other than mixed signals on what that looks like, depending on who you talk to.
Scott, isn't that really unusual that the leader's entourage would be so opaque that you have no idea? Like, up until now, we thought it was just Jenny. Now, Jenny, we don't know what her status is. But if it isn't her, like, is it just them? Like, who runs this thing? Just Pierre?
I think so. I mean, look at what he's had to say since he became leader. He writes that stuff. Like, you can tell he writes that stuff, and he takes pride in the way he writes, and he will not vary it. So there's rhyming couplets, and there's, all these clever catchphrases, and there's a sort what a kid in grade 7 who has a nerdy appreciation of politics envisions as soaring political rhetoric. That's what peppers his speeches, right? It is purple, like King Charles's robe, right? Over and over and over again. Give them wings and they shall fly. I've referenced it before. I'll never forget that speech. Like, it was just like, this is a guy who's saying something that he has fallen in love with, right? And so, which takes me to a question. We're talking about voter coalitions, message development, message adjustment, issue choice. And then we're talking about the entourage, all of these things. So what is the strategy? I have a more fundamental question. Is there a strategy? Is there a strategy in the way that people like us on this pod think of and conceive of it, whereby you do quantitative research, then you couple that with qualitative research, you see what's working, you see what's not working, you make adjustments, or are they just guided by gut and guile? Right? What they've always wanted to believe and the scores they want to settle. And I got to tell you, my impression is that is the strategy, and it is rooted in him. And I think one of the reasons that they've come back with such a vindication of everything they've done and the doubling down of the status quo is that if you're your own editor, you're going to go pretty easy on the choices the writer's made. And in this case, writing is just a metaphor for his leadership writ large. And I do think it's him and Anna. I'll say something else that's very impolitic. Watch out for her. She's taking a more pronounced role. Yes. Her voice is becoming louder. It's very defined, her voice. It is very distinct, and it has an edge to it. And I just think there could be trouble down that road.
Her note struck me more than anything else. And when you're talking about strategy, and now talking about W, just sound like George W. Bush. When you're talking about strategy, it is no way when you're going into a leadership review that it is strategic to say to the party membership, some of you fuckers pretended to like us and then you shimmied when things got rough, and we've taken your names and we're coming for you.
Yeah. I was going to say, I don't actually think it's a mystery who the inner circle is. It's Anna. And I think that she's very transparent about what their thought process is. It is about vindication. It is about proving people wrong. And she's been very transparent about that. And so if that is in fact what is animating the decisions leading into the convention, then I think we're going to see more of the same, not necessarily because it's pulling together the broader vote coalition they need, but because it's the story that they are telling themselves about what happened in this campaign.
Well, her social media posts are the only thing that competes in cringe factor with Sophie Gregoire Trudeau's. It's just
sure, but I think she's actually she's tapping.
She's more dangerous than Sophie ever was.
Absolutely,
she's in politics.
And she's
talking about politics.
tapping into something I think within a broader conservative movement that is really significant. And yes, it's aimed at women, so I think it's easy for it to sometimes be dismissed as a bit silly, and it's dressed up in a very girl boss thing. But she's doing something really significant there. She's pulled in a lot of socially conservative family values into some of her rhetoric about things that she's doing. She's pulled in this real narrative of the Poilievres as this persecuted visionary leadership within the movement.
So back.
It's a fascinating text. And anyway, I think people should take it seriously because they are telling on themselves about the story that they recite internally about where they're at.
Sophie is like aromatherapy and self-actualization. It's kind of an amusing corner, right? Anna is, I'm going to tie you to a wall and I'm going to deny you food and water, right? And it's a slightly different vibe.
Well, it's a good way to lose weight. So I don't know.
As we roll into September, the 2025 wildfire season is still upon us. So I'm going to keep talking about it on behalf of our sponsor, the Canadian Climate Institute. Facts on the extremely charred ground are this. This has been the second worst wildfire season on record, as fires picked up speed, volume, and at the heart of it all, fuel, the dried out and highly combustible forest tinder because of climate-driven extreme heat. Drought-driven forest bans and burn bans have been in place all over the country. Newfoundland evacuated whole communities, deploying both the armed forces and Coast Guard. Some staggering statistics. If you Google how many wildfires in Canada this season, the number is over 4,600. 4,600 fires, and more than 7.5 million hectares of land burned. The costs associated with this are just as staggering, both in dollars and public health. I don't need to tell you about how far and wide the smoke advisories were, most of you saw it out your window. Canadian cities had some of the poorest air quality in the world this summer. These fires released dangerous levels of particulate matter into the air, increasing the risk of heart disease, cardiovascular disease, lung cancer, and brain cancer. Poor air hits children, seniors, pregnant people, and outdoor workers the hardest. It all takes a massive toll on the healthcare system. The Climate Institute estimated that 1 week of wildfire smoke in June 2023 cost Ontario over $1.2 billion in impacts like premature deaths, increased hospital visits, and other health emergencies. That's without pricing in ecological damage, business disruption, firefighting, household costs, lost tourism, restricted recreation, and more. These are the real costs of climate change, the costs of inaction. And we'll keep paying them year on year, dramatically limiting our economic growth until we undertake smart policy to reduce our emissions and keep Canadian communities safer.
Look, I think the strategy is fairly out there and fairly open. Like we're going to keep doing the things that we were doing. This was a weird set of circumstances that we faced because of Trump, et cetera. We're going to hold the line on our support base. And the NDP are going to come back because the Liberals are going to cut the public service, and they're going to, cancel strike actions by Air Canada workers or other people, and that's going to cause an NDP resurgence. And that vote split at 42% will give us victory. That's the strategy, I think. Now, here's the problem with it. They're not at 42%. There's one poll in about a dozen that has shown that. They're more like 32
Only
to 35.
Only Advocates is showing them.
Which is I gotta say I love David, but when I look at him having Ford at 53, I think he's oversampled Conservatives. There's a problem with that poll, and there's a problem with that poll provincially as well as federally. But I think if you're to look at the polling averages, which are more reliable, the issue is this. A bunch of people who voted and shift their votes from the Liberals to the Conservatives in the last week of the campaign have shifted back to the Liberals. That's what I see in those polls. And the Conservatives are more like in the low to mid 30s, not at 42. And the gap on leadership has grown even wider. So, and we're not seeing any NDP resurgence. So I think this status quo, steady as she goes strategy is a high risk one. I agree with Scott. Like, maybe you shoot the moon the next time out, doing all the same things. I don't think as a rule, that's a good approach. I think you've got to change things up a little bit. Stylistically, I think
you have to change him. Come on.
He is the ceiling, right?
Come on, he's the wrong candidate.
He is the ceiling.
He's the wrong candidate.
There is a universe in which he can be successful, but he is also the ceiling to their growth. And it's him.
Sure. Here is the reality. He's going to be, in all likelihood, the leader in the next election. And why is that? There's no one who's out organizing against him in any meaningful way. And if you think Trudeau was stubborn and not wanting to leave, hold my beer, says Pierre Poilievre. Like he, I don't think can envision another job. He's never had another job. Other than politics. And I think kind of like Scheer, he'll be there for the rest of his life in the House of Commons, even if he's removed from the leadership, because he's, to a large extent, probably unemployable outside of politics.
He's an unlikable guy. And unlikable people are not usually successful in politics. And he's a very unlikable guy. And one of the most telling things ever said on this pod, Scott, was when you said people won't take a close look at Poilievre as long as they have to peer around Justin Trudeau in order to do it. And once Trudeau was gone, people looked at Poilievre. He was entirely a phenomenon of late stage Trudeau. And his popularity was entirely a phenomenon of late stage Trudeau. Once Trudeau's been gone, this guy is a lousy candidate.
Sure, but even
We'll
lousy
see.
candidates will sometimes be successful depending on
And
the circumstances. And I look to the collapse of GDP, et cetera. If the economy gets bad enough, you can create another Trudeau if the government is aloof and disconnected on enough issues. Like that's how Trudeau got into that position. And that's something that the Liberals, I think, are prone to doing, and that can be replicated. Right, but you're waiting for Carney to step on his own deck here, and I'm not sure that's the best strategy, because he might not, right? He might not, but
Pretty careful about that stuff.
yeah, well, not all of us have that
I
problem
mean,
having to worry about doing
sometimes.
that, but
Yeah, I don't know.
but
Never bumped into that. There's something, I mean, all of this, and you're right. The core issue is him, right? Because I look at the issue set. When I say Schrodinger's cat, like it's because you look at the issue set and you could easily see how this could blossom into a victory. But he is the barrier. There's one other thing that's inherent in this being about him, in that, and it's portrayed in his manner and his language and his focus. It's a backward looking message now. It's a backward looking candidacy, right? Like this, one of the challenges of the two-step thing is that it's constantly about, see, I was right. See, I'm going to be vindicated. Like it isn't inherently about the public's interest. It isn't inherently about the future. It is, let's reclaim the past and recapture that victory that was supposed to be ours. It feels very backward looking. And so like when he says, to me, one of the most fascinating things, a really bad piece of politics, what do you always tell your boss when you're advising someone, right? You're doing a message. All right. I always call it roast beef, right? Right. Roast beef it, meaning like if you want people to eat roast beef, don't stick it next to lobster. He goes out, he has a crime announcement, and he says, Jordan mentioned this. He says, Carney's worse than Trudeau. Well, first of all, nobody hears about the crime announcement now because that's the only clip that's going to get played. And that's some deep psychological fucking journey he's taking, right? Like nobody in the public, you have to tell
Nobody's
people
even comparing them.
No, nobody
remembers
that.
Trudeau, guys.
No,
like
but-
it's gone. It's over.
So he's dwelling in the past. He's dwelling in his head, and he's telling voters something they don't believe, which is the cardinal rule of politics, cardinal rule of sales, right? Any salesman says you don't start by telling the potential buyer something they disbelieve. You tell them something they believe, and then you bridge off of that into what you want. So I thought that was a startling day and a real peek inside his psychology.
Well, he doesn't seem to acknowledge, I think, the thing that exists in looking at that comparison. Poilievre is like Trudeau. Poilievre is way more like Trudeau, as we've talked about a number of times,
All politics.
than Carney is. Like, and so when you say no, he's you drawing these comparisons, I don't think he understands that he is drawn into that comparison as well. And the person who looks like Trudeau a lot of the time is frankly Pierre Poilievre. Like I think in terms of manner and tone and all the rest, it's just he's the other side of the same fucking coin.
Well, the question is he going to keep doing the stuff that feels good for him, or is he going to do something that helps build his vote coalition over the long term? We'll see.
Nature has always been part of Canada's story, and for nearly 2 decades, it's been part of a successful federal partnership too. The Natural Heritage Conservation Program has helped protect critical forests, grasslands, wetlands, and shorelines across the country. It's conserved 2,200 natural areas that combined represent 1.5 times the size of Prince Edward Island. Put another way, that's about 900 hockey rinks worth of nature every day since 2007. Program partners like the Nature Conservancy of Canada have rallied landowners, companies, foundations, other levels of government, and people like you to match every federal dollar with another too. This has resulted in more than $1.5 billion invested in nature, securing lasting benefits for species, people, and communities. Benefits like clean air and water, flood protection, food security, job creation, and economic livelihoods, all while protecting places to hike, swim, paddle, and fish for today and future generations. As Canada looks ahead, it's worth remembering what's working for us now. Learn more by visiting natureconservancy.ca/NHCP. Well, as much as I would enjoy this beating of Poilievre to continue, maybe we should move on. I'm sure we'll return to it in the future. But there is an interesting development this week in Canadian politics, and Chris Varco wrote about it in the Calgary Herald, and here's a segment of it. When you look at her career, she's kind of done it all, Natural Resources Minister Tim Hodgson said. From being a senior executive at BC Hydro to being CEO of TransAlta, where she led the transformation of the company away from coal and into renewables, to her experience at Trans Mountain, I couldn't think of anybody who had a better set of skills if what we're trying to do is build better and build faster. Headquartered in Calgary, the office will be responsible for coordinating and expediting the development of nationally important projects, such as new transmission projects, pipelines, ports, and LNG plants. The federal office aims to reduce timelines to approve major projects to a maximum of 2 years. Premier Danielle Smith applauded Farrell's appointment and the office's headquarters being in Calgary. Mayor Yoti Gondek said placing the office in the city positions Calgary at the forefront of major national efforts, reinforcing our city's leadership in trade, energy, and innovation. You couldn't get a better person to do this, Calgary Chamber of Commerce CEO Deborah Yedlin said of Farrell's appointment. That is all about the establishment of the major projects office in Calgary and the appointment of a person named Dawn Farrell to head it up. Now, Kory, that is an unusually effusive set of remarks for a Liberal government out of the city of Calgary. Was this a good call?
I think it's a good call. We'll see how it plays out over time, but I'm encouraged by it in that I think it can serve as a bit of a counterbalance to a PMO and senior ministerial ranks that are overly Quebec. Like there's a lot of Quebec in the senior ranks of this government, and I think there's been a lot of criticism of it, and that Hodgson's sort of the only change that you could point to that is has the hope of yielding a different outcome. Well, now we've got a couple of additional data points that I think balance the equation a little bit. And I think you see in the reaction of Danielle Smith and some others them taking some heart in that being the case. So very experienced person who is well known within the energy sector and within in business circles in Western Canada is one encouraging thing, and the second is that the office is going to be in Calgary. I guess what I'm a little bit concerned about, if I'm to try to find the dark cloud to go with that silver lining, how is this going to work having this office out in Calgary? Are we going to have something that is completely divorced from the rest of the public service, that is, working in isolation out in the hinterland on plans and strategies and on projects, and then it meets with the Ottawa reality of entrenched interests and bureaucratic empire building and all the rest? We'll see. That could go one of two ways, and one of them is pretty ugly. So it's going to come down to, I think, how committed is Carney to this at the end of the day. For all the talk of dictatorship south of the border, Canada has always enjoyed a mostly benign dictatorship politically. What the PM says, drives a lot of things in Ottawa and in government. Where is he going to come in when there invariably is going to be differences of opinion between the major projects office and elements of the federal public service? But on the face of it, I think it balances out the government a bit. I'm encouraged that there'll be experienced people working on it. I guess the only other question I'd have is for the projects that are east of Manitoba. Will there be equal emphasis on the nuclear build out in Ontario, on offshore wind in Nova Scotia, on other things that are priorities for governments east of center, and in which that major projects office might have some blind spots towards?
Yeah. Um, so, Jordan, why don't you sort of pick up on where Kory's at, and I mean, one of the things I'm thinking about, because I had this guy, this tech leader in Canada who's behind the Build Canada thing on the Hurly Burly back before I crashed, and uh, and I asked him flat out. I said, should all these projects of national interest, should they all be natural resources driven? And he said no. Like, why wouldn't we have why wouldn't we have, sort of a national project around AI or around something that is more new economy focused? Um, this feels like it's a pipeline office, doesn't it, Jordan?
Well, and therein lies the paradox and the challenge, right? Like I think that there's absolutely no subtext to the way the office has been set up. I think the new chair sounds supremely qualified, but there's no subtext in appointing a former head of TMX, right? There's no subtext to placing it in Calgary.
As
And so
Danielle Smith said, it would be absurd now for them not to approve a pipeline,
right?
right?
Right.
So I think that the challenge remains, and this is something we've seen with the Carney government continuously, is like, again, here they are driving expectations higher and higher, and really turning up the pressure on themselves to resolve these problems around natural resource project approval that are difficult because they are fucking difficult, right? They're difficult because there are political and economic and environmental trade-offs that go with all of these things. And I think that I'm kind of watching for a couple things here. I think that the majority of the opposition to the major projects push has yet to come. So I think that there is maybe a sense that Carney has kind of managed to stave off major First Nations opposition, that the environmental groups are being quiet. Well, that's because right now they're not focused on the specific projects. Like we're still speaking in general, in general terms here. So that opposition, I think, will become very concrete once projects start to be named. And that's where things become more complex. And the second thing is again, like what's happening with private sector proponents? Like, is this actually mobilizing private sector investment to get behind some of these big, complicated, phenomenally expensive projects, or is the expectation that the government is going to be funding these things? And I think when we look forward into a situation where the government is going to be significantly cutting budgets across the board in order to increase spending on things like military, like there are tough choices involved in those kinds of trade-offs. So that's the other question. At the end of the day, I think that the political signaling of the creation of the office in terms of who is heading it up and where it's located is interesting, perhaps interesting in terms of the expectations management, but this is all still just machinery of government stuff. This is really just the structure. This has not shifted the political challenges that remain in getting these projects done. I thought what was actually, to me, just as interesting as these decisions last week was that Carney was in Europe and he went, a number of places, but he went to Germany. And there he brought Minister Hodgson, who basically, who threw the Trudeau government under the bus on LNG and said, "We are ready. We want to get this like 5 to 7 years. We're gonna be ready to export LNG to Europe." Well, okay. So like this is, we're going to rebuild the Port of Churchill. This is a very expensive project. Who's doing this? Where is that money coming from? So all of these questions like have yet to be answered, but the expectations that are being set are sky high. So I think that we have to wait and see. This is still just a machinery of government piece. The implementation challenges are yet to come. And what these choices have done over the last couple of weeks has served to drive those expectations even higher.
Scott?
I agree with that. Like, as far as the appointment goes, based on the criteria they've established for themselves, it appears to be virtually perfect. They do want a natural resources focus. They want to deal with skepticism in politics of Alberta and the energy patch. And they want someone who has a proven track record of success. So all that makes sense. I think it is an interesting question.
An overt reach out to the West, right? An
overt. But it isn't just, it gets a de-Ottawization, not just in the sense that it's a Calgary office with a Calgary person, but it is also in the sense that Kory's getting at in terms of this is the first, like, it is very unusual for a prime minister to take something that is so fundamentally core to his agenda and say, I'm placing it in the hands of a satellite, right? Like, and I don't mean that geographically. I mean a satellite from the central bureaucracy, right? This is not somebody that's been recruited in. I'm going to bring someone into the public service and put them in charge of this office. It is set aside. It's almost like an independent office. How is all that going to work? And so the thing that I guess I would say, and really the tail of the fall, and I don't know how much of this is an opportunity for Poilievre and so on and so forth, but most governments fuck themselves up, right? They don't get fucked up. And so I think that the interesting thing to watch from my perspective is Carney's success has been so fundamentally defined by contrast with Trump and contrast with Trudeau. The big mountaintop that awaits being summited in terms of contrast with Trudeau is your ability to actually deliver, to execute. And so are we going to see projects? Now, I hear what Jordan's saying. I assume that Tim Hodgson, when he talks about these things, I assume that he has pieces that he's marshaling and he is conscious of things we are not yet in terms of being able to put wheels under the ambition for Churchill, which I think is absolutely their number one hope and focus. And so we'll see. But, it feels like the dotted line is not with the bureaucracies, not even with PCO and Sabia. It is with the prime minister himself. And I think one of the ongoing interesting challenges is how does this new PMO deliver in a more conventional time? Kory, you are sideways.
Yeah, I'm trying to figure out how
I mean, I've been saying that for a while.
I'm trying to figure out how to fix
so
that.
many ways.
I don't know.
Scott, Kory's,
I'm just going to do this.
It seemed odd not to mention it.
He just wanted a longer shot of the suit.
We've got a new PMO. And, how are they going to perform? Right now, this government has been the office of Mark Carney, right? It hasn't been, PMO is not running the government, it doesn't feel like. Unless it's on Mark Carney's desk and coming from Mark Carney's mouth, it doesn't feel like it exists within this government. And there are things that have to get done. So when you saw, right, the Air Canada flight attendants, right, it felt like the government kind of fumbled on that. That's not Trump and trade. That's not Mark Carney's desk, right? This week even, they issue that press release. Who the fuck has ever heard of a prime minister's office reissuing a press release so they can retool a quote from one of the consequent ministers? It's like, what? Like if you felt that quote was off in terms of messaging, chalk it down for next time. You don't reissue the PMO press release to say, we wish to signal to everyone that we think we incorrectly calibrated that. Like that's so weird and insidery. So are these guys going to drive and direct the government writ large? You got cabinet this week, you got caucus this week. We had the resumption of parliament in 14 days. I think that's a really interesting test. We know that when Mark Carney's in full control, without parliament in session, he's sort of doing a decent job of driving stuff. But now they are a government, and they will look like a conventional government with parliament in session. And how does PMO manage the government writ large? And that to me it's an unclear question. And Carney has a recipe, and that is, I'm going to create an office. It's going to be a satellite, and that's how I'm going to get things done. We might see other institutes and other sort of agencies created around this kind of thing. And, I think it's going to be really interesting. And in that sense, watch for the deputy shuffle. Does he bring people in? Does he create out more agencies? Does Build Canada Homes become like an agency of government? It's going to be interesting to watch what their methodology is.
Kory, let's just morph right from that into our last topic, which is a quick look ahead about the fall. And I want to just build on something Scott said about the PMO, which is I don't kind of get it. Which is in all the things that are getting done quickly in this government. The PMO. So I think everybody agrees Marc-Andre Blanchard, very strong choice as principal secretary, as chief of staff, and probably doing a very good job on a number of files. There's a policy guy there named Tim Krupa that people speak very, very highly of. David Lametti is apparently the principal secretary, but Tom Pitfield has not left still. and will not leave for a while, apparently. So, and it is really unclear to me how that office works and who in that office would really be providing the political advice to a prime minister that is brand new to politics. Who has the authority to talk to him about things that are blind spots to him? And I don't know that that exists, and I don't know that the PMO is structured well enough right now to complement him. What do you think?
I think he's getting a lot of advice from premiers.
Yeah,
And I think that's something
that's interesting.
that
That's interesting.
is different. Uh, I think
So he's getting his political advice from you.
Well, not directly. I don't. But I think there are a lot. I do think that there are more conversations happening between the prime minister and premiers, in any given month of this government than happened in the entire existence of the Trudeau government. And I think there are a lot of signs that advice is at times heeded. And I also don't think it's a bad way of going about assessing some of these major projects and some of the challenges that we're facing, because whether it's response to Trump on tariffs or whether it's these major projects, no federal government can do any of those things alone. You could pursue a path on response to tariffs, and if you didn't bring the premiers along with you, they could pursue an approach that is in contrast to it, maybe even in direct opposition to it, and really undermine the ability of the federal government to make headway on that. Likewise, there's the chances of being able to get a major project accomplished without buy-in from the affected provinces is somewhere between slim and none. So I think it makes a lot of sense to have that. So I think that's one other power center that's maybe not traditional in terms of how these things have rolled out. I don't know what his trap line of advice looks like outside of official Ottawa and those political circles, but I got to imagine, given his background, it looks a hell of a lot different than it did for Trudeau. Like he is a very different guy with a very different network.
Yeah, he will be getting advice from all the different circles. But when you look at the fall, if we focus in on, let's just take the budget.
So just the politics, right, in Ottawa.
Yeah. Just take the budget, though. I mean, if you're going to be, right, cutting the amount that they're talking about cutting in spending, if you're talking about reallocating from consumption to defense, if you're if you're talking about a budget that does or does not address people's cost of living concerns or fears, I mean, this is an astonishingly political document, in addition to being an economic document. And where's that? Where's that?
Well, with all due respect, David, if you wanted to get advice from official Ottawa and official liberal circles on any of those things, they tell you don't fucking do it. And yet it's going to have to happen, I think. And so I'm not sure what value the advice you'd be getting from a lot of the traditional sources in Ottawa, because like they would say, don't do it, bro. And I just don't think that that's in the cards. Like I don't think the country can move forward if you heed that advice.
Yeah. Well, okay. I think that there's clearly a lack of diversity in the advice that he's getting, and it is harmful. Whether you agree or not with the direction the advice comes from. Look, I think we saw it in the Air Canada dispute. He was getting exactly one kind of advice, and it led him to step on his own dick, right? Like that's exactly what happened there.
Poor Dick sure is getting a lot of work today. Gosh,
I just felt you weren't on it enough, Scott. So I'm going to step up. Yeah. But look, like this is clearly. He was not getting advice in the room from the people close to him, maybe outside the minister, from anybody who understood a single iota about labor and about how they were going to react and what was going to happen there. And so that's not about whether or not the government's agenda is acceptable or not. That's about being smart politically and not leading yourself into unnecessary trouble. If I were in that government and I were leading in to a budget that is going to have some of the deepest cuts that we've seen in almost 30 years, okay? And I was leading in with the numbers on affordability in terms of where people think this government's focus is and the level of concern in the public about things like cost of living, I would be pretty fucking nervous because there has not been any type of preconditioning, any type of sales to the public yet about what is going to be in this budget that is going to help them with the problems that they are facing day to day. And I got to tell you that what we're leading into is a very polarized and a very difficult discussion around guns versus butter. And there has been almost no work done to precondition that. And finally, if you are a government that has relied on progressive voters to get you into power, and you are going to completely neglect and in fact seek to alienate that base of voters, that is going to come back and bite you over the long run. And in fact, to do it so aggressively and so early on is inviting that to happen. So I actually think that the lack of diversity in the advice that Carney is receiving is a huge vulnerability for him. It's not that he needs to agree with it necessarily all the time, but he sure as shit needs to hear it.
Yeah, I mean, Scott, picking up on that and what Kory was saying about how advisors would tell you no, there's a lot of truth in that. I said I advised Paul not to do a bunch of things that he did when he was finance minister because they were going to be politically terrible. Sometimes the advice was not rejected entirely. Sometimes they did things a different way, and sometimes they didn't do it. But when he disregarded the advice, he would say, "Okay, we're going to do it. How do we do it?" And we would research that shit to death. The messaging would be tight and honed and based on both quantitative and qualitative research and filtered through a whole bunch of people's political prisms. I don't see that same operation.
I don't see it either, but that doesn't mean it doesn't exist. So I'm hopeful that it does. But I don't see it. And my casual observation is we're talking about what kind of advice he gets, who he turns to for advice, how is advice institutionalized. That's all making an assumption that he is receiving advice. My guess, I think about our morning meetings with Paul, be me, Tim, the chief of staff, and the clerk. And we would sit and we'd go through agenda, and then we would argue with him for 45 minutes about stuff, right? We'd spend 10 minutes talking about what's the schedule immediate, what's the schedule kind of upcoming that's of note, and then we would argue over 2-3 issues or whatever. My impression is I'm betting that those meetings are different with Carney. My bet is Carney says, here's the things of concern. Here's what I want to see done. Thank you, gentlemen. The door is to your left. And so I'll use this analogy. Forget, I may not even agree with Jordan about all of the sort of, you need diversity of points of view and so on and so forth. But I know you need to get advice. It can't just be, all right, I'm going to drive everything. It is the difference between, he loves hockey analogies, the prime minister, right? Employs them constantly. But it's the difference between head coach and GM. A GM puts the assistant GM, the head of player personnel, pro scout, head coach, trainer, all in front of him so that there are places, right, for criticism to go first if things aren't working or you need to make adjustments. And you also get advice and guidance from all those folks. It feels to me like he's GM, head coach, head scout, the whole operation, and maybe is taking the face-offs. So like, I just think you got to be careful about that. It's why I keep harping on this thing. This fall, I think, is going to be interesting, not because I think it's do or die for the government, but it's going to tell us what the nature of this government is, because it won't just be Mark Carney on parade, which is what we've seen since April 28th. It will be a government and how a government functions and executes and operates and where it gets things kind of screwy and so on and so forth. And that just can't all run through one man.
But I think there's a number of instances where it looks like that's not the case, right? Like I would concede there's a good likelihood on certain core issues where that's the case, where I'm not sure he's looking for a lot of advice. But you've seen some examples of things I don't think he gives two flying fucks about, like and where the execution hasn't been that stellar. And where at times there's been some fairly obvious blind spots from some of the senior team and senior advisors. I'd say the recognition of a Palestinian state and the rollout of that as being one of them.
Oh, no. You're mistaken on that. Come on, Kory.
That
was an absolutely owned decision on his part.
No,
You can't
no,
pretend
no,
that was
he-
done kind
he
of on
did
the
that.
margins.
Let me
He did
explain.
that.
Let me explain. Yes, maybe that we're going to recognize the Palestinian state, but the emphasis and the assumption that that would be met with a certain response, and there was, I'm not sure if you guys, paid attention to this part, they did recalibrate and sort of relaunch it a little bit with a different emphasis and a different comms plan. Which would indicate to me that there were some blind spots at some people around the table that whose voice wasn't heard, and upon having it be heard, there was a course correction. So it's maybe an imperfect example, but I think there's something to that. I don't think he cares about a whole lot of things. I'd look at the election campaign. There was a bunch of shit that in the last 10 days of that campaign when they launched their platform that I doubt he gave two flying fucks about. And I think it derailed their campaign in a bunch of ways, which maybe speaks to the bigger point. I don't think there's much of a political operation over there. I don't think there was much of a political operation over there during the campaign that was properly functioning, and I haven't seen a lot of evidence of one subsequent to that. I think, David, to your point, do they test and listen to the boss and say, oh, you want to go this way? All right, like let's get in the field and let's see how we communicate this and all of that. Not a lot of evidence of that. I think there's some evidence of consulting with other key stakeholders, whether it's the premiers or whether it's people in the business community or whether it's political advisors that are outside of the normal Ottawa circles. I think there's evidence of that happening. But is there research in political communications and an advertising plan and a comms plan that's robust? If there is one, I haven't seen one yet.
I agree. And they're going to need it. Right now, early days, but things are going to start to add up. And they are starting to add up already. Okay, Jordan, do you have anything you want to say before we go to our Hey Yous?
Well, I guess I would just add that, I think it's interesting to see how, this is government by technocrat, right? This is, Carney is the consummate technocrat and he's playing that role even as he is a politician. I think the danger there is always that there will be a tendency to privilege process over outcome. And so I think in the instances where you're seeing them run into challenges, that has almost always been the case. So, he'll need to look to make sure that his advice is staying focused on outcome, right?
All right. Hey Yous.
Ladies and gentlemen, please return to your seats. The Hey Yous are about to begin.
Kory?
I'm going to do mine to Sean Fraser, the Attorney General, and I'm going to bring back the issue of crime. There have been a lot of headlines the past couple of weeks about sort of castle law issues and defense, and that stacks up on many months of frustration around bail reform. And I think the politics of this, because political podcasts, are pretty grim for the government. I don't think, as we talked about earlier, they're seen as taking it very seriously. I think it's an issue that cost them a number of seats in the last election. I think it's not a hyped up issue. I think it's a real issue. If you're in Peel region, I think it is a real issue when you look at crime rates in Brampton and the types of crimes and the repeated nature of those crimes. People shouldn't be worrying about having a home invasion to get their car keys. But sadly, in parts of the country, that is the case. And I just don't see a government that's taken that very seriously. That's on the bail reform side. But I'll put one other layer onto it that, I think maybe for you and I, David, but you too, Scott, if you're in a more rural area, police response times are not in minutes, they're in hours and sometimes in days. And, you really have Canadians in many cases left to their own devices, not because there's some sort of, closet Batman wanting to act out some, Liam Neeson vigilante fantasy. It's because they live in a remote area and they have no recourse except to defend themselves as best they can. And they should be able to exercise that defense with some certainty that they're not going to end up having their life destroyed by being charged criminally. So let's take this stuff seriously. It is a big issue. It's an issue that's cost the government politically. They should be listening to the provinces and they should be listening to Canadians that are disproportionately affected by these crimes. and do their fucking job and change the law.
Well, and Sean Fraser, whom I love, should especially know that, because he comes from a province where the RCMP have established that they will let a gunman go around the province and invade people's homes and kill them without doing anything about it. So, pretty sharp in that place.
Yeah.
Hey, you, Jordan.
My hey this week is going out to Minister Champagne, very busy man these days, but he found some time to write a letter to the Canada Revenue Agency. So you guys may have seen, it's really hard to get a hold of CRA these days. I don't know if you've experienced that. I have. They
I
took
don't
a little.
wanna.
They
I
took
try
a
to
little.
avoid them.
They took a little too much money from me. And do you think I can get anyone on the phone there? Mm-mm. And that's because I'm part of the 95% of calls that do not get answered to the CRA right now. 95% of calls are not being answered. So that's a problem. I think we can all agree. And Minister Champagne has dusted off his pen. He has written a letter to the CRA demanding that they improve their services within 100 days. He wants to see an action plan. He's waving his finger very sternly. And
First letter
and
since the grocers, probably.
whoa,
Right.
that's right. I was going to say it's
I
giving.
will- I
It's
will
giving
write
the
again.
same
I will
I don't
write
see a
again.
plan within 100 days. It
That's
tells
right.
me what you're going to do in the 100 days
It's
after that.
like it's really
100
the
days
same
to
energy
reply.
as bringing those grocery CEOs together and asking them very nicely to reduce their prices, or else nothing will happen. Look, this is moronic. It is these types of service delivery problems that cause long-term issues for governments. Does anybody remember the passport debacle? This has the exact same makings. And guess what? It's not by accident. The CRA has already lost 3,000 jobs just since May. And they're staring down, again, that same 15% cut that almost every government department is looking at, that is going to cut more people who answer the fucking phones. So this is a problem. This is a problem that is likely to get worse and not better under the current government's plan. And so my hey you is to the minister. How about fewer letters and like actually just fucking fix the issue? Like somebody needs to pick up the phone. So you may need to hire more people to pick up the phone. I know that's a startling thing to consider in today's Ottawa, but you might want to think about it before you end up
But
with
he
a
knew it wouldn't get
long-term
answered.
problem.
Use AI. Come on.
Use AI. Yeah.
We don't. Like,
no point in
literally,
calling.
To
literally,
write.
use
How
AI.
else are you gonna-
So much worse than
Right.
that. There is an AI chatbot, guys, and it
Yeah.
is so useless. Like,
Well,
And that
you
letter
get
is
a better
delivered
one.
by Canada Post. It's a vicious fucking circle.
The last thing anybody wants is more fucking people hired in Ottawa. Like, give me a break.
I don't care where they're hired. I just want someone to pick up the fucking phone. That's
give
it.
you
So
your
that's
money
my
back.
hey you. That's it. Yes.
Send Jordan a check and make your problems go away.
Scott, hey, you.
My hey you is to I'm just going to repeat what I said earlier in many ways. My hey you is to the Prime Minister's office. I know this is the tiniest of things. It may sound like I'm being nitpicking on a clerical matter, but when you have to reissue a press release because you want to redraft the quote so that you can use different bullshit business book verbiage instead of the other bullshit business book verbiage that you used in the original one. Someone said this has to be redone and resent. Hopefully there's someone in the comms department who's saying, please, let's not do this. This is dumb. This looks strange. No one's really paying attention. Therefore, why do it at all? The only people who will notice will be people who will notice and realize that it demonstrates weakness and strangeness. I just don't. It's a bad sign, and it's the tiniest of signs, and so I know I'm obsessing. But as a former comms director, what the fuck's going on there? And it's not a good sign. And we're moving into the fall. Summer's over. School's back. Like this ship has got to get tight.
All right. Hear you. My hey you goes out to Minister Tim Hodgson, who needed to be one of the most important ministers in the government and is turning out to be one of the most important ministers in the government. Appears to be, for somebody who's a newbie, have hit the ground very sure-footedly, including this week with the choice that we talked about in this show of locating the major project center in Calgary, which as a Westerner I strongly applaud, and appointing a person universally considered to be very well qualified from a business standpoint in order to get that done. I mean, he's at the center of everything. Everybody wants this guy's ear. And so far, no false steps out of him. So good start, Minister Hodgson. So listen, you guys, thank you very much for this. This was fun.
Great to be back.
Good to
That's right.
see you.
Here we are.
It was very good. It was very
We're like
good
the
to be
Who.
back.
We're back on the road.
But not just without Keith Moon, without Zach Starkey, like we have nothing.
I'm
right.
going to see the Who on Thursday night.
You're going to hate it so much. I saw them
It's going to be
years ago and it
unbelievable.
was pathetic. You're going to hate it so much.
I know I am. And there's a piece of video from a concert they gave a week ago where Daltrey swings the mic about 18 inches. It hits him in the chest and then wraps him up, and he nearly falls to the ground until like a nurse comes over and says, seriously, we got to get you back to your favorite chair. Like I hope I die before I get old. Did not come true.
Man, no. Irony in rock and roll, nothing like that. So you know what our sponsors today, our presenting sponsors tell us, and our other sponsors are CN Rail, the Canadian Climate Institute, and Nature Conservancy Canada. And thank you to all of those people for sponsoring the pod. And thank you to all of you accursed out there who watch or listen to the show. And we're back, and we'll be back. Like the Poilievres, we're back. And we're so back.
And we have a list.
and we'll be back next week, too. So join us again next week. See you then. Take care of yourselves.